Um, Today's daf yomi is Avodah Zarah daf Samach Zayin, Avodah Zarah 67. Today's daf yomi is dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim, Hatzalah for the Shvuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael in this Eis Sarah. So we're going to start on 67a, Chodesh Tov, 5 lines from the top. That our Mishnah had said, Zeh Klal, this is the general rule. Kol Shebahana also, Benosin Tam, anything that when it gives off flavor, it's a positive flavor. So then we're going to say also it's prohibited. We're on top of Samach Zayin Amud Aleph, 5 lines from the top. Zeh Kol Shebahana also Benosin Tam also, said our Mishnah. Kol She'ein Benosin Tam, but anything that is not giving off a good flavor with its taste is mutter. And let's say, what's an example of something that's not giving off a good flavor? Greasing, like vinegar that falls up on beans. Rashi says, chometz pogim greasing roastlin umashpiach asatzonin. So Rashi says, just so this is the background to this discussion, that vinegar ruins hot beans, but it helps cold beans, that it improves the taste of cold beans. Also, we should know that even though I didn't see this amongst the Meforshim, there really is a slight distinction between the and the reason why I didn't see it is I didn't check every Rishon, obviously. I mean, there really is a difference between the language of the Mishnah and the language of the Gemara. The language of the Mishnah is kol shebahanaso benosin tam. Anything that gives off flavor for good is prohibited. Kol she'ein banaso benosin tam. Anything that does not give off flavor for good is mutter, is permitted. Whereas the language of the Gemara is no same time with gam, anything that gives off a negative flavor. Whereas from the language of the Mishnah, it implies that even if it's neutral, it's permitted. Whereas the language of the Gemara implies it's only permitted if it's negative. So it's actually a slight distinction between the language of the Mishnah and the language of the Gemara. So it says, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Hachi Hochasa, that this is actually the halacha that no same time with gam, that if it gives off a bad flavor, we're going to say it's permitted, like it's stated in our Mishnah. So the Gemara says, "V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Roshanu Ela Shenafal Atoch Grisen Roslin." When is this the halacha? If it falls into hopped beans, because the hot beans is going to ruin it. So then we're going to say that it's the vinegar ruins the hot beans. But if it falls into cold beans, but if it falls into the cold beans, and then afterwards, meaning it falls into cold beans, and so therefore it improves the taste of the beans. And then afterwards, here's sichon, afterwards he warmed up the beans. Then it's the equivalent of something that was at first improved and in the end deleterious, and so therefore usher, it's going to be prohibited. So that's the teaching that Shmuel taught. V'chein ki asa Ravin amar Rav Archanan Rav Yochanan Roshanu al shenaf otoch grisin roslin v'no naf otoch grisin sonin v'ersicha nasik mi she'eshpiach v'sof pagam v'asar. V'chein ki asa Rav Dimi, and indeed, so we have Ravin did this and Rav Dimi said the same thing. Fine. That, and then the Gemara says v'tach you osin ba'arvei shabbosos b'tzipori. This is what they used to do in Erev Shabbos in Tzipori. That what would they do? That they used to do the same thing. They would make this dish. They're just trying to show that you pour the vinegar onto cold beans, and it's an improvement. That's in fact what they used to do on Erev Shabbos and Tzipori, and they would call it the shechayim. There wasn't prohibited vinegar, so there's no problem, but they would call it shechayim. We see from here a makar for the idea that there should be a food that you eat specifically on Shabbos. a Shabbos food, a special food just for Shabbos.
Erev.
Well, no, they would prepare it on Erev Shabbos so that they could eat it on Shabbos. So this would be the food that they would do on Erev Shabbos to eat on Shabbos. So some wanted to say, actually, on this basis, some are saying today, some are being critical of people who go into like eat cholent on Thursday night, have a whole cholent party, because they say, no, there's a food for Shabbos. You have to have a Michael for Shabbos, a special food for Shabbos, and this is not a food for Shabbos. I mean, that's a little bit of a extreme, but the idea is that there should be a food that you eat specifically on Shabbos. Okay, so now Amar Reish Lakish. Now, how do we define this nosin tam of gam? So there's a very, very important question. So
Did it not define it before?
we just began to define it, but we didn't fully define it. The first approach is the approach of Reish Lakish. She says, nosin tam of gam shamar, that which we say that if it gives off a bad taste, it's going to be permitted. It doesn't prohibit the food. Lo sheyomu. It's not. We're not talking about a case. This is a stringency. Rashi tells us this first opinion of Reish Lakish is a stringency. Lo sheyomu kedei razu chasera melach yisera melach chasera tavlin or yisera tavlin. Don't we say it's not if we say what this dish was missing? This dish was missing something, and you could get away with it. But now that you add in this prohibited taste, it ruins it completely. That's not because if there would have been salt and spices there properly, then it wouldn't have ruined it. And that's not going to be called nosin tam of gam. Meaning to say, we're not talking about a case where there was it was missing an ingredient, and if that ingredient was actually there, then this taste would not have ruined it. That is not called nosin tam of gam. What's called nosin tam of gam? Ela kol she'ein chaser klum. Only in a case where the dish was perfect, ve'eina nechalas min nezeh, and as a result of adding this dish, the food is no longer eaten. So that's what Reish Lakish is saying. But I want to point out, Rashi says when it says eina nechalas, it doesn't mean that it's not edible. It doesn't mean it cannot be eaten. It means that it ruins the flavor. What?
Then what would it matter? You couldn't eat it. It's so bad you can't eat it. Then
well, you say that, but other Rishonim say, other Rishonim argue with Rashi, and they say that no, if it makes it something that you wouldn't want to eat at all, that's going to be, meaning it could still be edible, but just be something you wouldn't want to eat. Rashi's saying it's something that is negative value, that it's negative value that you don't want.
And for it to be mutter,
what?
And for it to be mutter, it has to be edible and good that you want.
Well, for it to be mutter, the flavor, it has to impart a negative flavor.
So the dish has to be
the taste that it adds has to be something you don't want. That's what Rashi's saying. Just something you don't want there. You wouldn't want. It makes it worse. Others say no, it has to ruin it. It has to ruin it. Like if you have chicken soup and you added sugar, I mean that's clearly ruining the chicken soup. It might still be editable, but it's ruining the soup. So Jeff's going to try that tonight. Ika de Amri, alternatively, there's a different version of this, which is the version where Reish Lakish's statement is a leniency, where he says, no sin tam of gam sha'amru, this, no sin tam of gam, this giving off a bad taste, which is permitted. It's not, we don't say, Kedei zu chasera melech, or yasera melech, chasera tavlin, or yasera tavlin. We don't say that this dish was missing salt, or it had too much salt, or it was missing spices, or it had too much spices, meaning to say, and that's why we're not eating. But if it would have the proper salt, if it would have been cooked properly, this taste would not have had an impact. But we look at it, but we say right now, this is imparting bad taste, and so therefore it's permitted. Meaning to say, we look at it in a completely subjective manner. He said, if it's ruining the flavor, we don't care exactly how, and even if the dish was not perfect, it's ruining it, then it's a problem. Then it's going to be a leniency. This is actually the first question everybody asks. Every rabbi asks when you call up the rabbi and you say, I did something wrong with my food. First, have to determine whether or not it's no same time of gam, because it's a leniency. You're not supposed to do it initially speaking. But if you, let's say, cooked in a pot that was, or you used utensils that had not been used in the past 24 hours, then it is no same time of gam, and so therefore then we can be much more lenient. So now because it's not going off a good taste, it's giving up a bad taste, and so therefore we can be lenient. So Amar Rabbi Avo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol shetamo umamasho aser. So he says anything that where the taste and the item was prohibited. Let's say you have a piece of meat that let's say a piece of non-kosher meat got mixed in with, or a piece of meat got mixed in with milk, or you have a piece of non-kosher meat that got mixed into the chicken soup, a non-kosher chicken fill-in. Also, everything is prohibited to be eaten. Vilokin alav, and you get lashes if you eat it. Vizel, and that's what we state. We have different shiurim. We had this in last week's parsha, and Parshas Ekev, that it says that Eretz Titus or Geffen Te'ina V'Rimon, Eit Shemen Udvash. And we learned about in the Gemara that all of the shiurim from the Torah, all the measurements are learned out from that pasuk. And so this is eating an item is then when do you get lashes on it? Kizayis, if you eat an olive size amount, the amount of time it takes to eat a loaf of bread, and how much is that? That's arba beitzim, the time it takes you to eat 4 eggs. This is the amount. If you eat an olive size amount of this prohibited food, and the time it takes you to eat a loaf of bread, you're going to be liable. So, and you get lashes. So there are two. There sometimes this amount. The time it takes to eat a loaf of bread is sometimes a leniency and sometimes a stringency. It's the different machokas about the time it takes. So, for example, on Yom Kippur, we're going to try and say, let's say somebody has to eat. So therefore, we're saying that you have the time it takes to eat a loaf of bread is 10 minutes. So if you have to eat for medical reasons, and we say, okay, eat less than an olive size and the amount of time takes to eat a loaf of bread. So then we say, okay, eat a cracker every 10 minutes, because then you've gone beyond the time it takes to eat a loaf of bread. So you're not violating the courage penalty. And what about to be strict upon yourself the other way? That is, let's say on Pesach, you have to eat an olive-sized portion of the matzah, and the time it takes to eat a loaf of bread. So some say that is within 2 minutes. But then people have to say to be careful that don't make the kazayas too big, because otherwise it becomes a comedy show of just trying to stuff the matzah down your throat too quickly. So we say, Damo v'lo mamasho. Let's say you have the taste. Let's say you have the milk fell into the pot. So the milk has, or let's say, so it's now melted away, or if you have chaylev that fell in, so now it's melted away, and so it's no longer there. And so therefore you have the taste, but not the actual item. You have the taste, but not the mamashos. Hold on 1 second. Just give me 1 second here. I want to look at one thing. So if you have the milk that fell into a pot of meat, or if you have the chaylev that fell and melted away, so it's not really there, so you just have the taste. Also, the ein lokin, but then you're going to get lashes. It's prohibited, but you're not going to get lashes, even if you eat an olive-sized portion of time it takes to get a loaf of bread. Why will you not get lashes just from the taste? Because this is a very controversial opinion also. Rashi says, because biblically speaking, the idea that just taste is biblically prohibited, that is actually not from the Torah. Meaning to say, even the Torah tells us that you can't eat the main item, that the Torah doesn't tell us that the taste is prohibited. And so since the taste is the only thing that's there, the item itself is not there, therefore you're not going to get lashes for it. It's just rabbinic. Tosfos, right over here, Dibra Moskal, the Tosfos over here argues, and Tosfos says on the bottom Tosfos on Samach Zayin and Alv, a very big Tosfos, he argues and he says that Tam Ki'ikar, the idea that the taste is the main essence, is also prohibited from the Torah. And he says, and so he has to come up with a different explanation. Others say it's so maybe he says that it's prohibited, but it's an aseh. It's a positive commandment, not a negative commandment.
Is that how it's Spider Man Mako?
What?
Is that why it's Spider Man Mako when it comes to gum?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know what they're doing there. Okay, the riba tam with gam, and so you don't get lashes under those circumstances because it's not biblically prohibited according to Rashi. The riba tam with gam, and if you added on a prohibition by making it defective, by meaning to say you're ruining the food, then we're going to say mutter. Everything is permitted to eat because that if it's ruining the taste, it's not going to be prohibited. Mara says, they question Rabbi Yochanan's position. Why didn't he say im nasa tam of gam? Why did he say if it added on the tam of gam? Why doesn't it say it just gave no same tam of gam? If it gave a bad taste, it's permitted. Why does he use this language of imriba tam of gam? So Gemara says, no, Rabbi Yochanan is coming to teach us the afagav the ikar mile achranisa to become a bahadei. Even though, let's say it's not the only thing that's ruining the flavor, even though there are other things like there are salt and spices that are adding on, will also added on, also cause it to be ruined, then it wouldn't be prohibited because and meaning to say he's ruling like this, he's ruling to be lenient in this matter, like the second position of Reish Lakish, that we look at the net result. If as a result of this additional prohibited item, the upshot is, even though if it had proper salt, it would have been okay, but still right now, since it's not okay, we're going to say it is permitted. Amarav Kahana midivrei kulam, from the positions of all these Amoraim that we mentioned earlier. Rabbi Yehuda, who said in the name of Shmuel that the law is no sin tam of gam is mutter, and vinegar that fell on the hot beans is not prohibited. And Rabbi Bar Chana, Rav Dimi, who said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the law that vinegar that fell on hot beans doesn't prohibit it. And Reish Lakish, who were lenient by a second approach, Nilmad, no sin tam of gam is mutter. That if you give off a bad taste, if it imparts a bad taste, it is permitted. Yeah.
What would be wrong with vinegar?
Vinegar could be prohibited, like we've been discussing, because of Yayin Nesach, if the wine was a libation. So Amar Abaye Bishlam Mikor makes sense. It makes sense. It makes sense from all of these positions. L'chayai. Ella de Reish Lakish. Okay, I understand all the first authorities that we were discussing. It makes sense why they say no sin tam of gam is mutter. But according to Reish Lakish, Amru Ka'amar, V'leilo Svirale. But according to Reish Lakish, you can't presume that this was his position, because if you look at Reish Lakish's position, Reish Lakish says no sin tam of gam sha'amru, that they said. It doesn't mean that he's saying it. Maybe he said they said V'leilo Svirale. Maybe Reish Lakish doesn't exactly agree with them when they say no sin tam of gam is permitted. So Gemara says, wait 1 second. You mean to want to say Mikal Diko Ma'adamar no sin tam of gam is asur? Do you mean to say that there is someone who says that even if it gives off a bad taste, it's going to be prohibited? Is that really your position? Gemara says, yes, it is my position. Tanya, and the Gemara says, in fact, we have this in a brisa that no sin tam of gam is prohibited, that there is a position, because it says echad no sin tam of gam, echad no sin tam of shvach. Also, whether it gives off a bad taste or a good taste, it's prohibited. Divrei Rabbi Meir. We really should say echad nosin tam shvach, echad nosin tam gam. Whether if it goes off a good taste or even a bad taste, it's prohibited. Rabbi Shimon Omer l'shvach aser l'fgam mutar. Rabbi Shimon says if it gives off a good taste, if it enhances the food, we're going to say that it's prohibited. If it ruins the taste, we're going to say, or if it is negative, we're going to say it's permitted. My time with the Rebbe Meir. So, okay, what's the reason why Rebbe Meir is of the position that noticing tam of gam is permitted? Why do we say that if it gives off a bad taste, it's permitted? So he says, Gamar mi giule ovdei kochavim. We're going to learn this out from the utensils of the idolaters, that the Torah prohibits us to use their utensils because they've absorbed in the walls of their utensils prohibited food items that were cooked in them. And so then this taste will be giving it out afterwards when you recook it. If you're going to come into an idolater's house and take their utensils and start using it, you have the flavor of their non-kosher food in it, and that's going to be a problem. But so this is why Rameir is going to say nosin tam of kam is usher. The Torah tells us we can't use their utensils. So the utensils, they're not giving off a good flavor. Nosin tam of gamu. So the utensils is giving off a bad flavor, and the Torah still says it's prohibited. So we see from here that giving off a bad flavor is prohibited. You had a question, Bill? So the Gemara says v'idach, whereas Rabbi Shimon says nosin tam of gam is permitted. How would he respond to this? How would he respond to this position? By the way, where do we see for the source for this idea that the utensils of the idolaters are prohibited? We learn this out in Parashas Maaseh, where it says when the Jewish people came back from the fight with the Midianites, it says in the pasuk there, "Kol davar asher yavo ba'esh tavir ba'esh." That the Torah says you need to kasher the utensils after the war with the Midianites, and you have to dip it in boiling water. So the Gemara says the idach is Rabbi Shimon who says noticing tam of gam is mutter. What's his source? So what's the source? Meaning the obvious position would be that it's prohibited. So what's the source for the idea that noticing tam of gam is permitted? He also like Rav Huna Brei Rav Chia. Rav Huna Brei Rav Chia. Well, Asra Torah al Kederas Bas Yoma de Loif Gamhu. That he says no. What the Torah is referring to there is that the utensils that are Bas Yoma, that are of the same day, that they cooked in it that day. They used it that morning to cook their breakfast. And so therefore, that's not noticing tam of gam. That's not giving off a bad flavor. That day is giving off a good flavor. And that's what the Torah was really referring to. Only those flavors that were added to the utensils that day. The idach. So what about Rabbi Meir? What would his response to that? He would say, "Kedera bas yoma nami afshar do porte." He says, no, even if it was used that day, it's still going to. You don't really want that flavor in your food, so it's still detrimental. So the Gemara says, okay, let's look a little deeper into the position of Rabbi Shimon, who says noticing tam of gam is mutter. The Gemara says, the Rabbi Shimon, my time. What's the reason for Rabbi Shimon? Meaning to say, Rabbi Meir's position is logical because he's saying it ruins it a little bit, and yet we still say it's prohibited. So the Gemara says the Tanya, because it's based upon the Brisa says it's based upon the verse "Tochu kol nevela lager asher b'sharecha," that you're not allowed to eat any carcass. You should give it to the foreigner who's in your gates. Kol haruya lager, and so we see any nevela that is able or appropriate to be eaten by the foreigner. Kiruya nevela is going to be called a nevela and is prohibited to eat. She'ein ruya lager, ain't a kruya nevela. But if it's not something that would be that would not be ruya lager, it would be something that would be getting ruined. That is not called a nevela. And so Rashi says, Alma she'esricha, it's spoiled. We see from here, Alma mida ifkim batal isur. So once it gets a little ruined, then the prohibition has gone away. So Rabbi Meir says, no, hahu miuta srucha meikara. Rabbi Meir says that that's just coming to exclude a case which started out with a negative flavor, meaning to say, well, it was still alive, meaning to say, like, it was an animal that was defective, that was clearly sick or something. And so therefore, the prohibition of the veil doesn't apply to it. But if it was only afterwards became ruined, then the prohibition is not departed. And so too with nosin tam of kam, since it was already prohibited, it doesn't depart. Rabbi Shimon says, "Shrucha meikara with shrucha miyuta afar ba'almo." He says, no, if it was initially ruined, you don't even need a verse because that's not food anymore. That's not edible. That's like just earth or dirt, and so therefore it's not going to be a problem. Okay, so we'll stop here. Baruch Hashem, I want to say that tomorrow morning, since we're davening for sunrise, we're only going to do